this is my audience. All right, and we are going to be discussing the death penalty today, okay? And these are my graphics. All right, so we're going to shed light on the topic of the death penalty today, and we're going to talk about, throughout this entire presentation, the key statistics involved, some important cases that shape the way we see the death penalty today, and we're also going to be talking about parties for and against the topic as a whole. So to introduce the topic, it is expanding today. So Alabama and Ohio both just introduced laws to pass to use nitrogen gas as an execution method, along with the ones they already have, such as lethal injection or electric shock chair. So that's really interesting to see that it is still expanding in 2024 today. And so one major case to begin off with is from a man named William and Henry Furman, and he's a 24-year-old black man, and he's described as poor, black, and mentally disabled throughout his case, Furman versus Georgia. He was known as the bungling burglar, and during a robbery, he accidentally fired a shot that killed the homeowner after tripping on a washing machine wire, and he was sentenced to death in the state of Georgia. And 6 months later, the Supreme Court overturned this case in 1972, saying that it was unconstitutional to sentence him to death because of his mental instability. And in 1976, then there was a case called Gregg versus Georgia, where the Supreme Court noted that it did not violate the 8th or the 14th Amendment, and this paved the way for how we see the death penalty today as its growing state. Another case against the death penalty argued that mentally incompetent cases are labeled as unconstitutional, and offenders under 18 cannot be sentenced to the death penalty because that is unconstitutional as well. And racially biased cases are known as unconstitutional for the death penalty. And lastly, wrongful convictions are unconstitutional. And since 1977, 123 people have been sentenced to death that were proven innocent later. So they didn't die, but they were wrongfully convicted. And then now let's move on to statistics regarding the death penalty. So we have on the labeled to be executed 15,000 Americans since the death penalty was instituted. And another statistic is that it costs 2 to 6 times more to execute someone via the death penalty than it would be to sentence them to life in prison. And since 2000, there were 85 executions, which has decreased today in 2024, that it's only 24 executions, and this number did rise since 2023, so it is still fluctuating. And for these graphics, we have over here, executions in the last 10 years are labeled in these states, these big states like Texas down here, Florida, all around where these blue X's are, and then no executions in the last 10 years are these states up here like Idaho and Nevada, and a couple over here, West Virginia, and things like that. And then across the board, there's also a pause on executions over here in California and over here, and there's the no death penalty in states down here and across up here like Minnesota and New York up here. And then down here, executions from 1977 to 2023, they were the highest over here between 1995 and 2000, and they have since decreased, but they did have a jump in 2023, so it is still fluctuating. Alrighty. So next, let's look at cases for and against the death penalty. So proponents in favor of the death penalty claim that justice for family is served in the sense that an eye for an eye, if you killed one of our family members or did something potentially really harmful to them, that you deserve to have such harmful actions committed to you, and therefore justice would be served. And they also say that it prevents additional crime, which it doesn't necessarily prevent additional crime from other members of the community, but it does prevent said offender from committing again if they were to be executed via the death penalty. And lastly, they say that retributionist, meaning that that it's moral and just punishment for the worst crimes, and they propose that it should still be in place, but it should not be expanded on for those who commit the worst kinds of crimes. And then there are proponents against the death penalty who say that it is an arbitrary punishment, meaning that there's no guidelines, there's unfair punishment for people overall. Mostly poor people and people of color are convicted and executed more often than wealthy people and people not of color. And they also say that it's an immoral and irreversible act, and that it does inflict torturous pain that society should be staying away from, not running towards with an execution date. And lastly, aside from these humaneness aspects, the death penalty uses taxpayers' money that could otherwise be used for hiring more police officers or implementing better society economics, such as higher paying jobs and things like that. So overall, these are the sides for and against. Those were some of the statistics presented, and sides of the story were presented, and cases that shape the way we see the death penalty. So thank you for listening. This is my audience. And